Today. We're excited to welcome Heather Stuart of Dillon Consulting as the guest speaker for our Transdisciplinary seminar. Heather has a Bachelor of Science degree from McMaster University, where she specialized in geochemistry, a master's degree from University of Waterloo in environmental studies. Heather is an environmental scientist with experience as a project manager, client manager, technical lead, operational team manager, and site supervisor. Over the past 17 years, she's managed hundreds of projects, from small site investigations to award-winning multi-million-dollar endeavors for Suncor Energy. Her client experience includes energy, oil and gas, real estate, resources, government, and industry sectors. Heather's distinguished specialty is managing large portfolios for her oil and gas clients, ranging in size from small-town border stations to multiple-acre compressor stations. Heather has helped to modify their programs to meet site-specific and regulatory needs. From managing the impacts on-site and monitoring the effects of ambient vapors to providing tailored remedial measures, Heather has been an integral part of the successful designated substance portfolio. As a further dimension to her varied skill sets, Heather has international experience in environmental assessments in the United States, Indonesia, the Philippines, Gabon, and Sudan. Let's all give a warm welcome to Heather Stuart.
Hi, thanks for having me here this morning. It's 10 o'clock, so it's not too early, which is great. Full disclosure, I'm a little sick, so I'm hoping my voice does not go out halfway through this presentation, but I've got some water to keep me going if it does. Just want to go through the outline. So I understand this is transdisciplinary. Give me the whole title.
Well, it's a Master of Sustainability Science.
Okay.
So, but our center is transdisciplinary in each area.
I wanted to take that and use what I've done with my career so far to show how what you're learning in school can be applied in a job and in a career as an example. So I'm going to go through a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk about what I do in terms of contaminated site risk. And I'm going to use that to come together in a case study of one of my projects down in Sarnia. And then I'll share a few examples of what my company, Dillon Consulting, does in terms of sustainability, because that's something that we are very passionate about, and it's becoming more and more important as time goes on. If at any point you guys have a question, please just raise your hand, let me know. I'd love to hear from you if you have something that you're curious about. So. Any curiosity before I begin? Okay, so what's an environmental consultant? When I graduated from university, I had no idea what a consultant was. Does anyone know what an environmental consultant is? No? Okay, so.
Did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
What is it?
Yeah, that's what you're asking me.
Well, it encompasses a lot of things, from environmental impact statements to environmental engineering, water resources, all sorts of things.
Yeah. It's a multidisciplinary role. I help clients with their problems. So if their problem is a contaminated site, if it's a regulatory issue, I help them facilitate, cleaning up or mitigating it, or having.
Do you mind? Sorry, Heather. I feel like such a pain. Can you stand on this side? I'm sorry. I set it up to this side, and I should have said that too. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, so you can go ahead. I'll fix it. You just stand there.
Is that better?
Yeah, but we can move it this way more, so you feel. Yeah, there you go. Oh, I'm doing it opposite. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What is it? Sorry.
You're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Yay! Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So my name's Heather Stuart. So I get to solve problems in my job, which I love. I love complicated challenges and trying to figure out solutions to them. So I took my background as an environmental scientist, and I'm applying it in a business context. So I don't build anything, I don't sell anything. People pay me for my time and my expertise, and I help them solve their problems, and then we get things done. So I manage projects, anything from a couple $1,000s to a couple $1 million in terms of scale. I work directly with the clients to help them figure out what they need. Some clients will come in and say, I need XYZ, and you're like, okay, and you give them XYZ. Most clients don't. They have an idea of what they need, so you have to sit there and help figure out what's the most important priorities that they need to achieve, what's their budget, what does the regulations say, and help them pull all that together to get the work done. I work in market building, which means I find new clients or existing clients that require new services that Dillon has, and I help facilitate that. And I'm currently an operational team manager, which means our team in Ontario, I'm one of the leaders, so I help facilitate the organization of our group and our resources when we need different people in different places. So I wear a lot of hats. So if you like wearing a lot of hats, consulting is for you. Okay, so my background, like you all, I went to university. I did my undergrad master, focused on soil, groundwater, freshwater, nutrient chemistry. It was great. I mean, environmental science is the best for field work. We have the nicest places to go and hang out for months at a time. I got to be up in lakes in northern Ontario for a summer. And then my master's, I wanted to do a bit of a larger scale, more challenging field program. So I hopped into remote sensing and hyperspectral remote sensing and spent 2 months on an island in Indonesia in a hut, no running water, no power, and had just a blast. It was a hugely formative life experience. And it's me diving there off the coast. So then I came back to Canada, finished my master's, and I went into consulting. Now, I'm a professional geoscientist. Does anyone know what that is?
It's a professional designation, kind of in the same way that there's a professional engineer. So it says I have taken so much this model phase, I can help.
Absolutely, that's exactly what it is. It's my professional accreditation. So is anyone here in the environmental sciences or related fields to the science aspect of it? Yeah. So if you want to go forward in your career and you want to continue on in a science-based line of work, being eligible for your professional geoscience designation is going to be a great benefit to you. So I would highly recommend looking up the Association of Professional Geoscientists of Ontario and seeing what courses you need and what background you need. It's so much easier to get those extra courses now than to graduate and be working and go, oh man, I gotta go back and take first year chemistry. That's gonna be really rough, right? So if anyone has a desire to do that moving forward, I really check that out now, and it will be helpful for you in the future. So as part of being a professional geoscientist, I'm a qualified person under the regulation to do environmental site assessment, so phase 1 and phase 2. You guys heard of phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessment? Okay. So phase 1 is a desktop study where you take a property and you look at it from database records, aerial photography, you do a site visit, and you're trying to understand what the environmental landscape is for that site and if there's any actual or potential contaminating activities. And then the phase 2 is where you have found some potentially contaminating activities and you go do the drilling and the soil sampling and the groundwater sampling to try to quantify what it is you identified in the phase 1. Okay. I'm also a lead AP, which is an environmental designation for sustainability. So biogeochemistry, I was transdisciplinary before it was cool. So that was back in 2001. All right, so the technical aspects of what I do, I assess soil and groundwater contamination. Predominantly, that tends to be where the majority of the contaminants I focus on are. I also work in sediment and surface water. The truth is they're all interconnected. And I delineate impacts and create remedial plans. So sometimes remediation is literally just digging it out, putting it in a landfill and bringing in fresh soil. Sometimes you can't do that because infrastructure is there and it's too complicated. We once had a site up near Port McNicoll that had metal impacts all through it, but it was a beautiful forest. And the forest was thriving, it just had high metal concentrations in the soil. You know, we didn't want to like tear down this forest just to get the metal concentrations down in the soil if there wasn't going to be a direct impact to ecology or people. So we found a way to mitigate and control that in place and dealt with it in situ. And then sometimes contaminants are on a property and they're not going anywhere. They're not going off-site, they're not coming up and volatilizing up to the surface. So you can just monitor them and make sure that they're not moving and they can stay there. I also work with clients one-on-one to help them build their plans, and I liaise with stakeholders. Okay, so what kind of disciplines are involved in what I do as a consultant? So obviously we have the scientific assessment. So I look at the chemistry of what I'm dealing with. So we'll take soil samples and I'll send it to the lab for benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylenes, volatile organic carbon or compounds, and PCBs, all that kind of fun stuff. We have to find out what the composition and quality of the soil is. But how do you know what's impacted? Like, how do you define what's contaminated and what's clean? What's the standard that you apply? Is that standard the same for each site? And the answer is no, it's not. If we have a playground, the level of contaminants that are going to be acceptable to be in that soil and groundwater is vastly different than if I had a site that was industrial, right? So if kids are going to be sitting on the ground and eating the dirt and playing in the water, that is a completely different level of exposure than an industrial worker who will be on site 8 hours a day and covered head to toe in fire-resistant cover-ups, right? So not only do you have to assess the type of contaminants that are in the soil, you have to assess the level of those contaminants based on the exposure to ecology, human, ability to be transported off-site. So those are the physical processes. You also have to think of time. And time is a really big factor because at different times in history, we had different types of contaminants. So if I had a gasoline spill today, I would go and I would sample for petroleum hydrocarbons and be good, right? If there's a gasoline spill 30 years ago, I would have to think about lead, because we used to have lead in gasoline, right? So all of those things have to be taken into consideration. A lot of math involved in what we're doing. If we have to understand how the contaminants are being transported, there'll be modeling. If your soil is a clay versus a sand, it's going to be traveling at much different velocities, so you have to understand that composition. Economics, budget constraints. As much as we would like to say any piece of contamination should be cleaned up, there's only so much money, right? So how to take the available budget that you have and get the most bang for your buck out of it. And then social. So stakeholder consultation can be anything from a property owner, a neighbor, a community member. Indigenous collaboration is something that we do a lot of. Many of my sites are adjacent to or on reserve land or indigenous land, and there's a lot of consultation and duty to consult that you have to do in order to make sure that the community needs are being met, because the community needs are very important and different from just a regulatory need, okay? It's a much different perspective. And then you gotta be able to communicate your results. I mean, it's one thing to write a technical report that scientists and engineers can read and we're like, oh, we understand what this means. But if you can't present that information to your client in forms of what they need to understand, and if you can't share that with the public in a way that's plain language and they can take it in and appreciate it, then the information gets lost. And all of the good work that you've done as a scientist and as an investigator gets lost in the weeds, sort of thing. So being able to take what you've done and put it in a form that is digestible by your consumer, right? You really have to know who your audience is. I have a client right now that's looking to buy a precast concrete plant. and I can do all the phase 1 and phase 2s that I want. They want to know, can I get money off my purchase price because I have to now pay for all this environmental impact? You know, they want to know, am I buying a piece of property that's already contaminated in the neighbor that I'm now going to be liable for? Like, those are the questions that they care about. The science is great for me. I think it's wonderful as a geek. But like for them, it's vastly different. So I have to understand what is important to them and make sure that I can help them answer those questions, as well as meeting all the regulatory needs. So this is just a couple of fun pictures of sites that I've been on through the years to give you a bit of an example. These two in the corner are from Sudan. I was hired to help in 2007. I was between civil wars, and the UN was pulling out of some of the makeshift airports that they had made. So they wanted to clean them up before the new operators came in. So my job was to go to these makeshift airports that the military had been using to get in and out to populate the wars, and assess the impacts, help clean them up so that the new operators could come in. Let me tell you, environmental consideration in Sudan was not what it is in Canada. You can see the stockpile of drums at the top. They're all full of chemical leaking. This wetted area here, it's just gasoline and diesel that's just soaking into the ground. They were in the middle of war, so environmental constraints and having good containment was not their top priority. So my job was to help them clean that up and understand how to not replicate the same issues again moving forward. It was before Sudan had split into two. This is a site in Cambridge, Ontario. It's a natural gas station. Natural gas used to have a lot of issues with mercury. They had pressure gauges along their lines that were filled with mercury. And when pressure would come through the line, it would hit the manometer and bubble the mercury out and fall on the ground. And so they would get their buckets of mercury and they would go back to the manometer and they would fill it up, put the bucket back down, and they would do that. If the bucket was full of mercury, it was kind of gross, they would like throw it over the fence. The thing with mercury is it doesn't break down really ever. And if you pull soil back, like 20 centimeters of soil, decades later, it's still there like diamonds, right? And this particular site had a fire on it. So imagine trying to put out a huge fire, water everywhere, the soil's getting all churned up, all the mercury that had been sitting there for decades is now disseminated everywhere in the soil. It's just spread out like crazy. So we had to do an extensive dig to get it out of the soil and remove that as a threat to some of the staff there. This is where I was this time last year. Actually, this is in Gabon, the west side of Africa. This was a oil refinery that had been shut in. Usually shut-ins take 2 weeks to do, where they take everything in the refinery, put it full of clean water, and leave it in place. The company was given 24 hours to shut it in. So as you can imagine, it was not done to code. And what results is everything starts to break down and leak. The elements can be pretty intense, especially when, this is in the middle of the rainforest and the jungle. So you have high heat, you have high rain. Humidity is crazy, and there's nothing covering a lot of this infrastructure. So everything just becomes brittle and degrades. This is actually like a pool of oil that I was identifying. I have no idea what that chemical was. There was one section of the site that I was trying to evaluate, but the smell of chemical was so bad, I couldn't get near it. And the crew I was with was trying to go up and look at it. I'm like, get out. Like, you don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. There's big, like, skull and crossbones on all of the drums. Like, we don't need to be this close. The answer is it's bad. So we need to clean it up. This is my, I'll take a pause, sorry. Any questions about it? So far? Okay. This is some of the work in Canada here that I've done. The top is in St. George. You guys know where St. George is in Ontario?
I do.
You do?
Shockingly.
Right? It's a small
Yeah.
town. They used to have this big dairy manufacturer there. They've been there and employer of the community for like 100 years. And the building had to come down, so I got to tear it down. I get to deal with all the designated substance in it, like asbestos, mercury, silica, vinyl chloride, PCBs. Work with all of that. The fun thing with this site is once we took the building down, we found all of these historical wells that they used to have for supply water underneath. And one of these wells was flowing at 200 liters a minute. So it hadn't been closed in properly. When we took the building off, all the pressure was gone, so the well was like, yes! So it started flowing at 200 liters a minute. And we were like, uh-oh, this isn't great. So we couldn't get it to stop. We ended up getting a camera down it. The water had been flowing for so long at the bottom of this well. It was the size of a Volkswagen Bug had been washed out at the bottom of this well. So luckily we were able to get a concrete truck to come in, and we did a bottom kill. We put a tremie line down at the bottom of the well and filled this sucker with concrete and crossed our fingers and hoped that it held. And it did, thank goodness. But it was definitely touch and go. So that was something that when we encountered, like, artesian wells don't happen in Ontario very often. This was a real unique situation. So you definitely have to pull from a lot of your own knowledge and your team's knowledge to try to find a solution. I had people come into the site from my company just to look at it because we've never seen this, right? So it was really kind of exciting. So at the bottom here, I was draining a pond that had to be filled in on the same site, actually. Building we got to take down that had all the contaminant along the bottom, so we got to clean that up as well. So, you know, when I was in university, I was taking courses on environmental science and chemistry and biology and like really good foundational classes. And then like I get to deal with all this stuff in my job, right? They don't teach this in university, but university really gives you the building blocks and the tools in order to problem solve when you get out. So if you're ever sitting in class going, oh my God, why don't I need calculus? You know, you will need it later, but the application comes with time. So don't think that, you know, you're learning all this stuff for no reason. It'll come up and you'll use it when you least expect it. So I was going to give an example of one of my projects to show how multidisciplinary it is. And this was a third-party pipeline in Sarnia, Ontario, where we had a very large benzene spill. So this was the refinery. The area in white was the remedial area. It was about 2 hectares. If you picture that area, it was just like hatching of pipelines everywhere. Different depths, different thicknesses. Some carried pure benzene. So, you know, gasoline has 4% benzene. This is pure benzene. Some had high pressure air, water mains, completely spaghetti with all of the impacts. And there had been a release of benzene in this area for many years, and it just kind of started coming to the surface when we recognized that there was a problem, because slow leaks, you don't always notice them, right? First Nations land is all around the refinery, including the cemetery that's really right in the heart of the refinery, and they own the road that this remedial section passed through. So not only was the impact to the land and the soil and the surface water and the ecology, it was on First Nation land, right? And so it was a very sensitive site, and it was one where we still don't know whose pipeline it was that contributed to it. So my client, who I give them all the credit in the world for being such a good corporate citizen, said, listen, it's on our land, we'll take care of it, even though this is likely not us that did it. So it took us a year just to figure out where all the impacts were, because there were so many pipelines. You can't just drill a hole in the ground, right? You have to identify where they are. Sometimes we use something called a hydrovac, where it's a high pressure hose that's like breaking up soil and then it's sucking it out at the same time, which is great. You can get down and not hit, you can get down and you can see any infrastructure that's going to be in your way as you go down, but it also means you can't sample any of that soil. So we had to do these massive V-shaped slot trenches where you would hydrovac out a V to know that you were clear, and then you would drill in the center of it, because then you could get your information on the soil quality right from ground surface and get all the way down to the depth of investigation. That takes a long time. So this took us a year to evaluate just where it was. And then we did some modeling with it to find out where the heart of it was and where it had gone. So all of that science, all of that planning, all of that math and physics was great, but then the First Nation community was really scared, and they were concerned, and they were angry. This is their land, right? Land and nature to them is completely connected. And so they wanted to understand what was going on and what we were going to do to fix it and hurry up, because it's already been too long, right? So we had to take that information and put it into plain language reports and documents so that they could share it with the community and be open and transparent about what had happened, what we were doing, and how we were going to clean it up. This here is a schematic. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a groundwater monitoring well. If you're ever walking, even in the back path out there, and you see like a blue casing or a stick up, that's a well, and it's monitoring groundwater, and you can monitor the elevation of it to see how it changes, or you can sample the water there and get the quality of it. So you'll have at the bottom of your well a slotted screen that allows the water to flow through. You have a riser pipe to the top. You fill this with sand to allow water to pass through, and then you use a bentonite, which is a type of clay that when you hydrate it, it makes a completely locked off area. And the goal, if you have a petroleum hydrocarbon, is to make sure that this screen is taller than your water table, because if you have a petroleum hydrocarbon, it'll float on top, right? So you want to be able to have that so you can measure it as you're coming down into your well, how much product, we call it, how much product you have sitting on top of the water. So all of this has to be explained to community members in a way that they can understand. And this was a complicated site. Like I've been doing this for years, and I found this hard to understand. So that was a real challenge that we had to do. Then we had to get to the point where we were ready to remediate. And with 2 hectares of impact, we couldn't clean it all up. There was too many pipelines, there's too much soil, it was not going to be possible. So what we had to do was take it as much as we could. Then we had to put in a groundwater collection system to help remove that impacted groundwater over time, put it through a treatment center, and then put down a GCL, a geotextile clay liner, so that any other precipitation that would come and fall on it would not get into the massive contaminant and continue to make it spread, right? So this took 6 months, I want to say, to go through and take that soil off and create this trench system, put down these massive clay liners that had to be knitted together, and put in this extraction system. So as of June 2017 to this past fall, we've extracted 7 million liters of impacted water. Our concentrations have gone down in some areas from like the hundreds of thousands of micrograms per liter of benzene to like 5 micrograms per liter of benzene. So the groundwater is really getting cleaned up. But there's still impacts left in the soil part of it that are going to be there for a while. So now we have to allow the groundwater in the area to recharge, soak that soil, mobilize the contaminant and absorb it off the contaminant, and then bring that water back down to flush more contaminant out. So, I mean, this system is going to be in operation for decades, right? But the important part is it's no longer leaking into the surface water. It's no longer migrating off-site. People walking by can breathe in and they don't have a concern about any residual air impacts. And the animals that live on the area, the turtles and the snakes and the voles, they are no longer at risk of ecological concern. One of the nice things about this, oh, I'll just do this first. Okay, so this project started in 2013. We had to do duty consults, remediate it, assess it, air quality, construction, put it all together, and it's now 2020, and we're still, we're at the monitoring stage now. Now it's just kind of a steady state. So these things take a lot of time. They're not quick, and they cost a lot of money. What was really nice about this particular project is it had the ability to be very contentious. Our first meeting that we had, the consultant for the First Nation came in and threatened to blockade the entire refinery and said, if we are not happy, your refinery will be shut down, which is basically a cost of $1 million a day. And I'm happy to report that we never had any blockades. We never had any anger. We worked with the community throughout, and their consultant was presenting at a conference in 2017 and used this project as an example of how to effectively do duty to consult. And then we actually got an award for it as well. So it was a real example of transdisciplinarity and how important it is that nothing can be in isolation, whether you're a scientist or a sociologist or economist. Everything has to work together for such multifaceted problems, and the more information that you and your team can have in general, and the more you invite into it, the more fulsome your understanding and your ability to correct can be. This is just some of the clients I work with. I remember when I first started out, I came out of university and I was a little uppity, I guess, thinking, oh, I will never work for oil and gas. Oil and gas must be so evil. And I got humbled really quick. I realized that oil and gas was not evil, and that the people that work there are wonderful, and they are trying to do their business in an environmentally progressive manner as possible. And I enjoy working with them greatly because they take it very seriously. Their health and safety programs are top-notch. Their commitment to the environment is top-notch. I don't know what it was like in the 70s, but today, here now, it's really something to be proud of. And Canada is a resource-rich nation, whether it's forestry or oil and gas or what have you. And it's there's a way to do that in an environmentally responsible way, and I'm happy to help them do that. Other industries, like Carmelot and Cogeco, municipalities everywhere needs consultants to help with that. So I like to work within the system to help them meet those objectives. So I was going to switch to sustainability, but I'll take a moment to see if you guys have any questions about application.
So back to the slide you were showing about destruction of water outside of Dillon. So what did you do with water?
Great question. So we had a water treatment on site called GETS, a groundwater extraction treatment system. So we took the water out and we ran it through carbon filters, and we had a series of 4 carbon filters. So once it passed through the first filter, it would remove, let's say, 70% of the contaminant. And then as it went through, it would take away more and more of the benzene. And then when it came out the other end, it was perfectly fine water. So that water was put into their, they have a big water treatment system on site that empties out into the municipality. So all the water that came from our site was clean and put into their sewer system and water treatment system, and then went to the municipality. So the water that came out at the end of the day was perfectly clean.
You could have drank it. I wouldn't for some reason, but you could have. Like chemically it was fine. But. Do you guys get to do a lot of field work for your courses? You guys have any field trips? Does any of this want to make you like get on a boat and go do some sampling? Pretty fun stuff, I gotta tell you.
I was just curious in your example. You talked a fair amount about your background in scientific training.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with different forms of knowledge? An example, like where you had First Nations, different ways of knowing.
Yeah.
You know, where science may not be the common or customary way of knowing.
Yeah, I mean, that's something where you have to go in with a lot of inquiry, a lot of curiosity, and not come in thinking you know all the answers, right? You know, we have our understanding of the science and the regulatory, but First Nation, they have a completely different set of values, and those values are as important as anything that I could bring to the table. So sitting down and listening and asking questions and just being silent until they're ready to share was something that we did right from the beginning. Every report we produced for that site, we shared with their environmental council, and we had feedback on every single report, things that they had questions on or comments on or wanted clarity for. And it just meant that we took things at a very deliberate, slower pace, and we invited feedback at every possible opportunity. And we took some of those values, we took those values to heart. For example, one of the ditches had benzene in it, and the benzene was at levels that was by regulation safe. You know, the animals wouldn't, by our calculations, would not be affected by it. But these animals were very important to the First Nation. They were part of their ecology, they were part of their community, and it mattered that there was benzene in the water, even though it was at a safe level. So we're like, no problem. We built exclusion fences along these areas so that none of the animals would get into the water, and that made them feel more comfortable. So we were happy to do it. There was a lot of concern about air quality. So we invited First Nation people to come out and be air monitors with us so that they could monitor themselves what the air was. Because sometimes you worry about these big companies lying and, you know, hiding results. So we're like, come with us, like be part of it with us and measure for yourself what's happening on site and what you see. So it was that willingness to be transparent and open and collaborative and to listen that really made the project run smoothly.
It's just a follow-up question. How do you reconcile duty to consult in a situation where you don't have a client who's willing to be a good citizen and step up and do all the right things that you just described? I mean, it sounds like a very ideal situation, but certainly when you think of the cost, I mean, and duty to consult does not mean that you need to consult. It doesn't mean you need consent. And you've got regulatory in different jurisdictions at play. So have you had any experiences, you know, in a very contentious situation where there's a duty to consult, but you have a client that doesn't really want to necessarily go that extra mile? And if so, how do you square that as a consultant in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure my colleagues have. I haven't had an experience like that yet. I mean, so much of our power to require that is regulatory. Like they have to. You have to consult, and it has to be effective. And it has to be quality consultation. It can't just be, I send you a letter and it's done. Like there has to be more in-depth consultation, and that is becoming more and more understood and prevalent and required. So maybe back in the day you could get away with that. Now you just can't. And we, like First Nations are our clients as much as they are our rights and title holders and stakeholders. So we're very aware of that. And if we have a client that was trying to be less than judicious, then we wouldn't work for them. Like the nice thing, so Dillon Consulting is a privately held firm. We've got 18 offices now across Canada, and we're privately held. So I answer to myself, my colleagues, our partnership. We get to decide our future. We don't have stakeholders telling us what to do. So If we have a client that we don't like to work for, that doesn't pay us, that doesn't have the same values of us, we drop them. And we're happy to do it because our reputation, we've been in business for 74 years now. I mean, that means more to us than anything. So we have the ability to do that. But many times if we sit down and we explain to our clients why they should care, why they have to care, and how they can work it into the project as a whole, I mean, they come along with us. Yeah.
Does everybody on your team have the same sort of scientific background that you have, or?
Nope. We're all unicorns. We're all slightly different, which is really great because you have all those different perspectives, right? I work with environmental engineers, hydrologists, hydrogeologists, biologists. I work with planners. I work with landscape architects. Every type of engineer you can imagine. So everyone has such a different background and perspective. And with our own company, we all have such a different path forward in our career. You know, I don't want to go on about how wonderful Dillon is, but Dillon's wonderful because you can really chart whatever path it is that you have passion for, and there's projects to support it. So everyone is a little bit different, and you know, our philosophy of integration goes right down to our structure. You know, one day I could be your boss as a project manager for this project, and then tomorrow you're my boss as project manager on some other project, right? So there's a real level playing field, and it allows for that free flow of ideas because it takes the ego out of it, right? We even have an economist. We hired an economist. Which is something that you may not think is you know, necessarily what you would think of from an environmental and engineering consulting firm. But for those large like P3 projects, having an economist there to help understand scale and implication of cost in the long term. Also tying to sustainability. We've done projects for municipalities where we have taken their infrastructure and said, okay, let's assess the veracity of your infrastructure now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What by priority needs to be fixed now, what can wait, and helping them monetize that over time, and then helping them with their insurance companies figure out what has to be done now and what can wait, sort of thing. So all of that has like a real economic impact as well. So. Okay, I'm gonna hop forward, unless you had a question there.
No, I was just going to say it's always interesting for me to hear your perspective because so much of what we talk about is, the dishonesty or the trust issue around knowing what companies are doing and how they should be accountable. A lot of students are interested in corporate social responsibility, and so you're touching on some of those, which I think is good because it's very rare they get a chance to really talk to someone who's in it. And the other piece that's sort of swirling around in my head for me is that often students think a lot about, assignments and what does the professor want? And I get lots of questions around, well, what do you want to see in that presentation, right? And I want to try and move them from that mindset to the position where they're at in the workplace, where you have to make these decisions on your own. And I would love to hear a little bit, maybe when you're done, about, what are the skills that you developed or that you think they should really focus on? They get to work with a real world kind of client, the town of Lincoln, through the Brock Lincoln Living Lab. But I really want them to be thinking about that. And I know they're going to be thinking about co-op. And I wonder if Dillon is, and yes, the co-op office is actually sorting out with Dillon. Are there opportunities for co-op this May, right? So anyway, that's all kind of swimming in my head at the moment. So you can kind of think on that while you,
Well, for me, I came from a science background. I had to learn business. I never took a business course, and now I'm involved in charge of these huge budgets and with clients, and I had to learn on the job, right? Okay, I'm going to go through and give you a couple of sustainability examples of projects that we've worked on and clients, just to give you a little bit more of a taste for that and how that works in industry. One of the biggest pieces of regulation to come through in recent years has just come into effect in January, called the On-Site and Excess Soil Regulation. Really, really impactful to our business. We've been all over it. It's a very big deal. So I'm sure you've all have heard of it. Anybody? Shocking. Okay. What this regulation is intended to do is it's intended to take soil that's viable, that can be reused and keep it at a landfill. If you think of all these huge developments going on, downtown Toronto or building construction on campus, you have all of this generated soil, and where does it go? Right now, it can be put, it does get put in a variety of different places. Sometimes a farmer's field, sometimes they send it to a landfill, sometimes who knows where it ends up. So this regulation is designed to reduce the carbon footprint of generated excess soil and to make sure that soil is viewed as a resource, right? Soil is finite, especially topsoil. So we should be reusing it whenever we get a chance to do so, and not necessarily sending it to landfill. Now, landfill needs soil for daily cover. So in order to make landfills not smell and have all the birds and all of the rats and stuff, every day when you get a layer of garbage, they'll often put down a layer of soil to help keep down the odors, to keep everything contained. But all this other soil that's clean, now by regulation, you can't just dump it in a landfill anymore. You have to beneficially reuse it. And that could be something like making landscape berms or filling in pits and quarries. When a quarry comes to the end of its use, what do you do with it? You can make a pond, be a great big pond, but you can also fill it back up to the surface with soil that's generated from other areas and do that as well. So there's a lot of different ways to use the soil, and this regulation is now forcing industry and municipalities to really think about that. There's a lot of sampling required in it. It's going to be a lot of tracking. It'll be very heavy on the front end, but for moving large volumes of soil net, it should actually save companies money because tipping fees at a landfill are pretty expensive. Versus if I'm sending this to someone who wants to have a berm at a reuse site, they're not going to charge me a tipping fee to give them material that they're going to use, right? So the net cost savings will be there, but it is expensive on the front end. But that's something that Ontario is doing, and it just came into play. It's going to be coming in different sections over time. That's going to be a big one. So water is the resource. So this is a project that our planners did in Dillon at the Port Lands in Toronto. I'm going to do this very high level because I am not a planner, but it's such an interesting project. I wanted to share it here with you. Okay, so the purpose of the environmental assessment in the master plan was to reimagine how the Port Lands would look in terms of redevelopment, engaging pedestrian traffic, engaging industry, engaging commercial business, and reevaluate and plan an area that had been primarily industrial. One of the biggest issues when developing urban landscapes is what do you do with all the water? When it rains, when it snows, what do you do with all of that water? I mean, it's a big concern. You just put it in a sewer and it goes right out into Lake Ontario, right? You're taking a large volume and you're bypassing the ecological system. So what this brilliant group of planners did is they assessed all of the issues, but then looked for the opportunities. What could they do with this water? What could they do to reimagine a space that was primarily kind of not pleasant to walk around, and you wouldn't think of like taking your kids there and your dogs to go for a walk. How could they engage the community in it and make it a public space that was positive and beneficial use? So they decided to view the water as the resource in this redevelopment. So they wanted to take something that was a problem and turn it into a solution. So in all of the assessment and the planning for this area, they used all the water instead of bypassing it through the system and used it for sustainable reuse, whether it's for ditches that could be lined with aquatic plants and frogs and turtles will eventually come to inhabit, whether it's to water trees and plants along bicycle walkways. They took all that water and they were using it integrated into the system as opposed to just bypassing it to Lake Ontario. So you see the different landscapes where they've tried to do that here, and all of this doesn't just happen. I mean, the easy thing is to pipe it away. But this takes integrated engineering. Our landscape architects were just phenomenal on this, putting together the thoughts and the plans for this moving forward. And it takes a space. If you've ever been to like the Brickyards in Toronto, anyone? It's a site where it used to be just old industrial factories, and now it's completely reimagined with shops and restaurants and places to dance. I don't know why I did that, but it's something that has engaged the community, and it used to be just kind of not very useful. So the idea is to take something, engage it, and give it a community use and feel for it while being sustainable. Dillon as a company is committed to sustainability on many different fronts. We've been carbon neutral for a number of years now, and we view sustainability four different lenses: the environment, society, our workplace, and our marketplace. So just a couple of highlights of what a company can do. I mean, we've reduced our carbon dioxide by 5 tons per year? Anyway, we've been a huge company and growing, but we've actually reduced our carbon footprint and our emissions based on our sustainability initiatives. We've given over $1 million to environment community funds since 2009. So in 10 years, we've given away $1 million, and that could be anything from small local events to larger charities. We did a huge donation on our 70th anniversary. We gave $70,000 to a mental health charity that coincided with Bell Let's Talk. I wish I could remember the name of it. I apologize that I can't, but we had our company, our staff as a whole vote on what we wanted to do with this $70,000, and we chose a mental health charity as a company. We believe that we are responsible to be sustainable in our workplace, and that means work-life balance. That means mentorship, equality, diversity. That means women in Dillon as a group are recognized, and our proportion of gender in the workplace is definitely higher than in other companies and in most industries. So we've put a real focus and priority on that. We have a Thrive program where every employee in Dillon is given $200 a year to put towards the gym, exercise equipment, whatever it is that you want to make you active. Here's money to do so. And then we provide services to our clients in the marketplace that are sustainable and use that as a lens. Thanks.
Okay, we'll take some more questions then from the audience.
I have a question, a general challenge maybe that a consultant faces, not only an environmental consultant.
Sure.
When you go to consult a company, a client or a company, and there are people who have been working there for like 15 years or 20 years, and they in-house are not able to develop a solution to that, instead they try to hire a consultant. Do you face some resistance and some opposition from them when you go to consultant that, hey, you've been just coming here for the last 2 months and now you're directing us to go on to this recommendation?
Yeah.
And we've been trying it out for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Just a general thing that came to my mind thinking about the role of a consultant when you go on switching from an organization to the other in a very short span of time.
Yeah, I mean, so as a consultant, we're often put in that position And so we have to look at these as collaboration. You know, our clients are our lifeblood, right? They're people to be you work with and not against. So it's important to engage not just, you know, project manager to project manager, but the team of the client that you're going to be working with as well, and listen to what their concerns are. I mean, the amount of institutional knowledge you can get from people who've been around for 20 years that is not written down anywhere is phenomenal. I mean, there's such value in that. And the only way that you get to have any of that information is by having a collaborative experience with them. And if someone is coming at you with their guard up, they're not going to tell you any of that information, and you're not going to be able to do your job, right? So you really have to come in with the mindset of, yes, you know, we have the solutions, but we're also here to learn from you who are the best at doing your business so that I can do my business, right? So it really has to be that humility and that understanding of integration between both sides. Yeah.
I have a question about the new regulations
Yeah.
as well. I guess specifically to that regulation and then more generally to sort of other similar regulations. To what extent do they get enforced, or is it easy for certain companies to sort of just not do those things, or is it pretty stringent?
So that's where a professional geoscientist and qualified person, it falls on us a lot of the time, because the ministry can't go out and police. I mean, yes, they have the SWAT team. Yes, they can, but it's on us professionals to be the first line of defense, right? So, for example, in that regulation, everything to do with the project in terms of excess soil lands on the QP. So I am responsible for everything that goes on. If someone is doing something they shouldn't and bypassing that, it's on me. So yes, the ministry can come and go after the client, but it's on me to have responsibility for that. So if you think of how important a license is to a professional, I'm not going to take on a client who's going to put that in jeopardy. Forget that. Or I'm not going to work with someone who's not going to be part of that system. It's too much of a risk. And more and more that the environment and sustainability is in the public lens and people talk about it, it becomes commonplace. I mean, there are still companies that see environment as a cost. Like, oh gosh, I got to pay you for some dirt. I just want to get on with my business. But the more that everyone understands that we're all connected and how important this is commercially, socially, economically, you know, the better it is for everybody. So to answer your question, it's on the professionals who are in charge of the projects for the most part. And then we have to consult our clients and tell them, you know, I'm in a site right now where our client has contaminant going off site, and we're at the point where I'm like, you got to tell the ministry, and it's going to cost you $1 million to clean up. And I'm really sorry, but your stuff's going off site. You got to deal with it. And if they don't deal with it, then, you know, you try to make them see that perspective. And if you can't come to a reasonable meeting of the minds, then maybe I'm not the consultant for them. And that's fine. If they feel that they're in their rights, then power to them. I have to just do what's right for my company and our position, right? So sometimes it works out, and sometimes they just need a different perspective for their needs, and they're going to take a risk or whatever. Yeah.
Just more of a curiosity question, because I've always wondered this. So when you're like at a site and there's all this waste material that you're dealing with since you kind of took down a building, that kind of stuff, I don't know who it falls on, so I'm not sure if you've had experience.
Hopefully it falls on no one.
sorry. I'm not good at it.
That's terrible.
Where does all that material go, and how do you ensure that it's disposed of in an environmentally friendly manner? Because sometimes I live in construction sites and they're taking down buildings, and it's overwhelming to see how much waste comes of that.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, like, where does it actually go? How do you ensure that it's disposed of in an environmentally friendly manner? Can it be reused? Like, what happens with that?
Yeah, so most haulers will separate, and you'll see a building come down, and then they'll spend days on site separating out the rebar from the concrete, the wood, from some of the other stuff, because different receivers will only take certain types of materials. So you'll send your wood someplace different than you'll send your metal. And the dairy facility that I took down, there was like $1 million of scrap metal because it was high grade, food grade material. So the haulers, they had a great time with that, right? If there is an economic driver or a regulatory requirement, that motivates good behavior. Right? Lead AP, you saw some of those letters after my name. You can get certain credits as a green building or as a green site by managing your waste in an environmentally responsible way. So that's another motivator to get people to make good choices. Yeah.
I was just going to ask something about the situation where you're consulting for a company and then you find out they need to report this to the ministry, and in that event that they refuse to, would you have to report that to the ministry anyway?
That's a question that we've asked recently, and I don't know. I don't know where that is. I don't have I don't know. I've never gotten to that point where I've had to like tell on a client. So I probably should know that answer, but I've never had to answer it yet. So I should know that answer. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah.
You can find out and I'll let them know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good that you haven't been put in that position.
17 years I've never had to. So yeah.
I recently came across a term, brownfields, and like brownfields remediation.
Yep.
Does much of your work also fall into that category?
Absolutely. So you have two types of fields. You have green fields and you have brown fields. So green fields are farmers' fields, untouched land, forests. Brown field is everything else that's had development on it. So you see an old gas station and it gets redeveloped into an apartment building. That was a brownfield redevelopment. And there's federal, provincial, municipal funding to encourage companies to come in and deal with the environmental mess and then turn it into something useful. And I love sites like that because it takes something that is just like a drain on the economy, it's a drain on the community, it's an eyesore, and it turns it into something that's beneficial for everyone. And government tries to encourage that by different funding and grants. I don't. I mean, we have some sites that do bioremediation. It's not always very successful. It can be expensive and it requires a lot of time. So I had a site up in Owen Sound where the client owned the site. They were going to own the site for years. They weren't going to divest it. So we had a huge stockpile of soil that had nutrient injection and would get turned and aerated every once in a while, and that was fine. It cleaned up the soil over time and they could reuse it, but they had to hang on to it for like 15 years or something like that, and they weren't willing to do it. So it can work. You can do different injections into groundwater with like permanganate or temperature. You can raise the temperature of groundwater to burn off some of the volatile chemicals. Hit and miss with success rates. I've seen sites where you dig down like basically the corners of your property and you put down either a barrier wall or granulated carbon to help reduce contaminant flow and concentration. That's really helpful. But generally extraction and dig and dump is the quickest and most successful for most contaminants.
I was wondering which lead designation you hold and how it influences your work as a scientist.
So I didn't hear the first question.
Lead designation you have?
AP. So I don't use it much, I gotta admit. I got it in 2014 and I used it on one site for the soil redevelopment. And then I haven't needed to use it since. So I haven't gotten the newer designations of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was before there was like lead AP buildings, lead AP
call the different categories in lead AP?
It was before that, so I'm just lead AP, so I get all of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll probably wrap up now, and I know you're hoping to wrap up, yeah.
I chat a lot, so
You're not 100% today. But we talked a little bit earlier today, Heather and I, about, as we do every year now, Heather's been doing coming to visit every year for some time now. At least I think 5 or 6 years.
Well, I'm trying to change it up so you guys don't get bored here.
Yeah, she's basically come since the program came into existence and in different formats. So this year was a little bit of a different talk. Normally she appears from 5 to 3. And we talked today about, some of those skills, the professional development skills I have shared with you, but I would love for her, if you can take maybe a minute or two, to just share, what are some of maybe the qualities that you really value? You've hired a lot of people, you've hired a lot of students. Well, at one time they were students, and there's certain qualities that maybe you value in a coworker or a collaborator that maybe they could think about in the future. Again, often they're looking to us as the experts to know how, what do we need to put in a report or a presentation, and I try to remind them that, you want to be sort of proactive and think about what could be useful to the end user and mobilizing knowledge, and how do we do that?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, if you can, off the top of your head, sort of what are those qualities that you or someone like Dillon would really look for in a potential employee?
Sure. So I'll share a couple of those in a second. First, I want to talk just briefly about your cover letter and your resume. When you're applying for a job, expect that there's 50 other people applying for it as well. Your cover letter is 1 page, your resume is 2 pages. That gets you through the door unless you have some sort of recommendation or someone there. Put so much time and effort into those documents and make sure that they're personalized. Because if you consider that your starting salary is what, $40,000, $50,000, those 3 pages are worth $40,000 or $50,000. So what kind of level of effort does that require? Because it takes me a minute to go through both. That's it. That's my first brush. You're in or you're out after my first cut, and then I'll go through the top 20, and then I'll narrow it down to the top 10, and then narrow down to the top 5. So those documents really need to convey to me why you're amazing and what are you bringing to the table. And the whole statements at the top, I'm a hard worker with a great attitude, I don't even care. Right? Anyone can write those. You demonstrate to me what you've done. You demonstrate to me in your explanation that you're a hard worker. So I demonstrated my leadership ability by leading 3 classes of X and providing feedback, blah, blah, blah. Demonstrate to me what your qualities and characteristics are. Don't just tell me, because anyone can tell me, right? Show it to me in your language and your cover letter, that you can prove who you are to me by what you've done, okay? Once you get into an interview, it means that you've passed the low bar. The low bar is, are you qualified? So if you got to the interview, congratulations, you're qualified. Now, what else is there? If you think how many hours you spend at work, let's say it's 40 hours a week. That's a lot of time to spend with people, right? And if you're in any sort of team environment, you work in a group, which I can't think of many jobs that don't have some sort of collaborative aspect to it. You have to be able to lead as well as follow. You have to be able to learn. You have to be able to listen. And your attitude is so, so important. I've had people come in with a stellar resume and they walk in the door and I just realize within the first 30 seconds that this is not going to work because they have a level of arrogance or just an unwillingness to learn, thinking that they have it all. And, 90% of what I do, I learned on the job, right? Your work really teaches you these wonderful fundamental skills on how to put all of your foundation into play. And you need to work for a place that's going to help you elevate that, but you have to bring your own proactiveness and your own engagement in order to get the most out of it. Work pays you and you do your job. right? But work is going to elevate you if you bring in energy and excitement and a willingness to engage and do that work. I mean, it's a 50-50 relationship. And the more you bring in, honestly, the more you get out. So I would encourage you to go in with a sense of excitement and curiosity and passion. And going into those interviews, you better have researched that company. You better know what year Dillon started. You better know what type of work we do, what type of clients we have. If you show up and you know nothing about us, that shows me you are unprepared. If you're unprepared for something as important as a $50,000 paycheck, then you're not going to be prepared for my clients either, right? So showing up with a good attitude and preparedness is really important. And be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Don't try to be whatever TV show interview says that you should be. If you are an introvert, be an introvert. If you are an extrovert, be an extrovert. Just be yourself in those interviews and trust that the people on the other side of the table will recognize you for who you are. And if they don't, probably don't want to work there. Okay?
So what if you are applying for a job that you have a lot of experience in, I think my background is biology, so I have a lot of experience in biology, and I have experience in certain aspects of field work, but not exactly the same field work that they're doing. So it would be like new kind of techniques that you kind of have to learn.
Sure.
How would you like approach that situation since you don't know like those techniques? How can you like show them that you're willing to like work really hard to learn them, or like you're not kind of
Yeah, so I mean that you just described every person that I've ever hired that's coming out of school, right? You don't have the techniques that I need to teach them to you. So if you come into me and say, listen, I did this field program where I don't know, doing biology, dissect frogs, that was what I did. No. Completely insulting, I didn't mean that. No. But like if you come in and you tell me like your field programs and what you did and what you had to learn, I'll know, oh, there's a hard worker. There's someone who knows how to learn, apply, and get to the end result. So I don't need to know that you have the technique. I need to know you have the ability. So if you can show me you have the ability, whether it's from a part-time job example, from a course example, from your background and your thesis or whatever, as long as I know you have that ability to learn, then I can teach you. Right? So just show me in whatever way you can that you have the ability to learn. And I remember doing one interview with a colleague, and it was a young woman in front of us, and she told us that she had worked construction building fences. And my colleague, she walked into the room and was like, I would have hired her off that job description, right? Because it meant that she had been in the field for long hours. She could work really hard and had a lot of endurance. And that's, a lot of the characteristics that we need. Building fences has nothing to do with what we do, but that work ethic and that ability to learn is crucial, right?
Thank you, Heather, for joining us today and sharing your experience and work with us. Just to summarize, Heather spoke to us about assessment, mitigation, and remediation at contaminant sites. She also shared insights on the significance of transdisciplinary perspective and problem solving while working on sustainability projects across different scales. So this brings us to the end of the session. Thank you again. And as a token of appreciation from entire ESRC, we would like to present a small gift.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate everyone stayed awake, so that's great. I appreciate that. If you have any other questions, then just let me know. All right. Thank you.